Hi everyone, this week's lecture is on implementing the IEP and monitoring student progress. So in the last module, we spent a lot of time working on developing SMART goals. And in previous modules, we were talking about the different parts of an IEP. So what we learned, just as a review, is that an IEP will first start with their students' present levels. Where are they at today? So that's a really important thing to start off with so that you can develop those SMART goals that are very specific and relevant to that particular student and where they're at right now. And then once you determine what those SMART goals are, you need to figure out how to implement those and monitor the progress of those goals. So what is progress monitoring? Progress monitoring is the process of collecting data and analyzing that data to determine and look at student progress on those goals. And it's used to make instructional and service decisions based on student performance. So if for instance, an IEP team develops some IEP goals and starts monitoring progress of those goals and sees that, the data is not showing any progress or something like that, then that is enough. That's the information that the IEP team needs to have in order to sit back down again and see whether or not those goals need to get rewritten or adjusted in any sort of way. Because what we learned earlier is that you want to make sure that you have goals that are challenging for the student, but you also want them to be realistic and you want them to be successful. So you need to find that balance. And so if you monitor the progress of those goals and collect and analyze data as you go, you can figure out whether or not there's any problems that need to get addressed, and you can address them early on. So the rationale of progress monitoring. So we know that IDEA is the law that talks about IEPs. And part of the law requires the students to have the IEP. And that IEP, as we mentioned, has to include a statement of how the child's progress towards the goals is going to be measured. So how's it going to be measured? Another thing that the IEP team needs to determine is who's going to measure those goals. So there's some current challenges that occur while doing this. And so I think it's really important to understand what these challenges are, because a lot of times if these challenges aren't addressed, it can lead to conflict between IEP teams. And sometimes it can also lead to due process, parents to file due process. So the first one is the IEP team may fail to develop or implement progress monitoring plans. So they may end up with amazing goals, but they may not ever talk about how the progress is going to be monitored. So, it may be that maybe the goal isn't specific enough. And maybe the goal doesn't, remember we talked about the goal is going to be SMART, it's going to have an M, which is measurable. Perhaps maybe that goal is not measurable, or perhaps the IEP team hasn't really talked about who's going to monitor the progress. Second one is that responsibilities for progress monitoring are improperly delegated. So again, that's not talking as a team collaboratively about who's going to monitor progress for each specific goal. Third one is that the IEP team does not plan or implement progress monitoring for behavior intervention plans. Fourth one is the team uses inappropriate measures to determine student progress towards graduation. Especially as a student gets to transition age, do those goals and the progress, is it monitored to ensure that the student is going to meet that transition plan? And then lastly, progress monitoring is not frequent enough to meet the requirement of IDEA to provide meaningful data to the IEP teams. So that's what I was talking about a minute ago, where we were talking about if you're monitoring progress along the way, you can identify problems early on and you can meet as a team to either revise the goals, come up with another plan, work with other team members collaboratively to problem solve, talk with parents and see what's going on and what they're seeing on their end. So if you're monitoring progress often and frequently, you have more ability to provide that meaningful data in order to make changes if needed. So prerequisites. I do not know what is going on with my So anyway, sorry about that, you guys. In order to collect data that provides evidence of student monitoring, we have to include SMART goals. And as we mentioned, the annual goals must include clearly defined observable behaviors and actions in the condition on which the behavior is performed and the performance criterion. So who's going to do it? What are they going to do? How well and under what conditions? So what we need to do is we need to create these goals that are able to be, we can collect data on. So that's one thing that when you're creating a goal, you don't want to have a goal that you can't measure. So you want to think about, gosh, how am I going to actually create data, collect data on this? Can I observe the student doing the particular, achieving the goal? Is that something that the student is going to self-report? Or how's that going to work? So that's important to think about as you're creating those goals. So again, this is just a slide that's a reminder about SMART. So what we're talking about here is mostly the specific and measurable. So if you don't think about when you're creating a goal about how you're going to measure, then it's going to be really, really challenging. And you want to also be very specific enough about what you want to accomplish, again, because if you don't, you're not going to be able to measure that. Achievable, you may not, the goal may be measurable, but it may not be achievable. So again, that's what we were talking about is if you're collecting data on an ongoing basis, you're going to be able to identify that early on and determine if you think that maybe that goal needs to get adjusted because it's maybe not achievable right now. And you're also, if you're collecting data on a regular basis, you're also going to be able to tell whether or not that goal continues to be relevant for the student. And again, time bound, if you don't have a time frame, you're not going to be able to accurately measure whether or not the student has met the target dates. So I wanted to give you some steps to take in order to do progress monitoring. The step one is to review the existing IEP. So it's impossible to measure progress unless there's a baseline to start with. So that's again what we were talking about. The first step of developing an IEP is to make sure that you understand the present levels of the student. Because if you don't understand that, then you're not going to be able to monitor progress against a baseline because you have to have a starting point. And then you're going to determine if the IEP goals are measurable. So again, looking at the goal, asking yourselves, okay, well, what's the outcome of that goal? What do we need to do to observe the student? What conditions are we going to observe the student in? And what is the criteria that we're going to use? What type of data is going to be collected? And who is going to collect that data, report that data, and compile that data in progress? And then where is it going to be collected? So is that going to be how, and then also how is that going to be shared with parents and the rest of the IEP team? Second is the actual data collection. So now that you've created a plan and thought about, okay, well, let's look at the IEP, and then the first step was to really look at it and make a plan for collecting data. Now you're going to actually collect the data. So the first thing you're going to determine is the measurement type and tools. So the tools are going to be, how are you going to collect the data to measure the progress and evidence that the student is performing specific IEP goals and objectives. And these goals are going to represent different types of measurement in order to provide a clear picture of the progress. So the data collection tools are really going to be very specific to depending on what the goal is. So there's different types of measurement tools. The first one is direct measurement. So that's going to provide it's going to be something that you can actually observe. So behavior is one of those things where a teacher or other specialists that are working with the student are going to observe the student and document them doing certain things. So that's a direct measurement tool. Indirect measurement, on the other hand, is something like looking at rubrics. I don't know why it keeps doing that. oops, looking at rubrics, is the student actually performing on a scale that we want them to on a specific task? You also, for indirect measurement, can look at and ask people for interviews of student performance. So you can talk to parents, other people who are working with the student to find out whether the student is achieving certain goals and milestones. And then also student self-monitoring. So students could be documenting their behavior and performance through self-recording of specific cues. And then authentic measurement is providing evidence of student performance through student input. So that's, in previous modules, we showed examples of portfolios and work samples. So that's what we're talking about here. So that's documenting student performance, so like collecting all of these things. And there's so many different ways that you can do portfolios. But putting that together, and that's really showing, so it's pretty similar to direct measurement, but you're actually showing that performance in a measurable way. And that's really a very common way too. And then data collection schedule depends on how the service is delivered. So it's really going to be dependent on the type of goal that we're measuring. If it's direct instruction, the times for data collection, is that going to be worked into the day, the regular instruction day, or is that something that is going to be collected outside of the general education classroom? Is data collection, it doesn't necessarily have to be separate from instructional time. It can be it could be something that the para educator or the teacher is recording during the day, showing that, which allows them to get a real picture of student performance. Or it could also be when the service is being delivered. So if a student is out in speech or vision services, the data can be collected in relation to that. It can be collected remotely by regular education teachers or service providers. It can also be collected in consultation, and it can be scheduled at specific times. But my opinion is that measuring it during the class day, where you can get a much better picture of what's going on with that student. So that would be optimal to try to do that if you can. But there's different ways to do it, and just really, again, depends on the type of goal that you're trying to measure. And again, so we're talking about as part of step 3, the data collection schedule. So if your progress is monitored on a more regular basis, like daily, then you're able to look at the effectiveness of that particular goal and service on a more regular basis as well. So if you're monitoring that daily, then you can figure out maybe if something is more effective, maybe on an every 2-week basis. On the flip side, if you're monitoring progress on a quarterly basis, then you may not be able to determine the effectiveness of that service until, maybe a year from now. So again, if you can, it's good to monitor progress on a more regular basis so that you can determine whether or not a goal or a service or support needs to get adjusted during the year. Step 4 is compiling the data. So again, this is a critical component because you may have a lot of data, but you need to put it all together in a way that other people can understand, that you can figure out whether or not a student is making progress. So what this is summarizing the data that you've collected on a regular basis during the duration of the IEP. And if you do this on a regular basis, it's kind of like reconciling your bank statement. If you do it on a monthly basis, it takes much less time than if you try to do it, a full year at a time. Same kind of thing. So I would recommend trying to do it on a regular basis. And then because this provides the team with very useful points in order to make decisions. And if you do it on a regular basis, it saves time and confusion during meetings. Again, on step 4, the data compilation, if you collect data on a more regular basis, like daily, then it's recommended that you would compile the data on a weekly basis. If it's the type of goal that you can't collect data on a daily basis, if you're only collecting it once a week, then maybe you should compile the data on a monthly basis. So these are just recommended compilation schedules just to give you an idea on how that might work. Step 5 is data reporting. So, you have a lot of data, you've compiled it. Now, how do you put it together to report it to parents, families, and the rest of the IEP team? So what you want to try to be doing is showing progress on IEP goals and short-term objectives. So you need to think about the format of it. What's it going to look like? Is it best on a form, a graph, a narrative? If it's a narrative, try to accompany it with some hard data, especially if you're recommending a change. And then try to explain any instructional changes or specific circumstances. So if you've noticed anything along the way, or if things were going really well, and then you really saw something really weird going on with the data, maybe there was, the student was not feeling good that day, that's something that you should really note while you're doing the data reporting. And then lastly, we've already talked about this, but using data to make instructional decisions. So this is really important because you just don't want to make decisions based on gut. You want to have as much data as possible in order to problem solve and figure out if changes need to get made. So you want to consider whether or not progress is made. So did the student make progress that has been expected by the IEP team? How does the student's performance compare with the performance of other general education students? Is the student more independent in the goal area than they used to be? And then will work on the goal continue? Or will the student be dismissed from this goal area? So have they achieved their goals? And if so, maybe it's time to work on something else. So I hope this has been interesting. Final thought is that progress monitoring needs to be focused, clearly defined, and completed. It will ensure meaningful educational programs for students with disabilities. And so it's kind of the final step to IEPs and how to implement them. And I know for parents, a lot of times you'll have this amazing IEP with all these great goals, and oftentimes it's just the measurement and the progress doesn't get reported. Or the goals don't change because no one on the IEP team knows whether or not progress is being made is for instance, maybe there's problems with who's actually, like we talked about, who's monitoring that progress, or, is that the right goal for the student? And so, you could have a really well-written IEP, but it might not be being implemented. So, that can be really frustrating, both to parents and families, students, and the entire IEP team. So that's why this piece of it is really, really important. And sometimes it's not easy because there's a lot of things that come into play. The IEP team, for instance, might have the greatest intent to try to implement these IEP team or IEP goals, and those are based on services and supports that are put into place. For instance, but there could be problems getting services. So for instance, with my son's IEP team, we've been trying to hire a teacher of the deaf since the beginning of the summer, and we haven't been successful yet. So we had put some goals in place for that teacher of the deaf to actually work with my student or with my kids, but because we don't have that person in place, it starts to get a little bit frustrating because obviously the child is not making progress on those specific goals because you aren't able to get the services in place that the IEP that is mentioned in the IEP. So those are some of the examples of things that can happen, and some of those things are outside of your control. Sometimes it has to do with administration and other things that go on. And so I think it's just really important to do the best that you can, monitor progress when you can, and if you see a problem or if you aren't able to implement an IEP or monitor progress, it's just communicate that and those struggles and those problems and strategies and things with the rest of the IEP team. So I hope that's been helpful. I hope everyone enjoys this module and has a great week.